Charles Corley was using ChatGPT before it was cool. On today's episode, learn where ChatGPT can help in real estate and where it struggles.
For a large language model, I would say that most leaders ought to use it as what I call a second brain, a way to think things through. It's a junior employee who's just amazingly brilliant, but easily confused.
Hello and welcome to the Lease Alert, where we have conversations with the smartest, most interesting people at the intersection of real estate, leasing, and accounting. I'm your host, Matt Waters. Let's learn something together. I'm really pleased today to have Charles Corley with me, and Charles is in Singapore. I met him recently at the Cornet Global Summit and quickly realized that Charles has more experience and frankly more interest in AI or artificial intelligence than just about anybody else I've ever met. And I know you guys, our listeners, are interested in learning more about AI. So I invited Charles to join me on the Lease Alert. So Charles, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's not AI in general, it's mostly generative AI. And I think what I'll be talking about mostly is ChatGPT and this what they call the large language model type of things. Nothing too fancy.
Yeah. Well, hey, this is very fascinating to me. I'll tell you, just your initial response there has already taught me something. So I think we have much to learn from you, Charles. So we're going to really spend most of our time today talking about AI or generative AI and ChatGPT. But first, can you tell us a little bit about your role? I know you work for an international construction and design firm called Moser, has a great reputation globally. What do you do there in Singapore and around the world for Moser?
Yeah, well, I moved here to Asia 33 years ago. And when I was probably 32, I'm in my 60s now. And I'm an architect. And I was an architect in Annapolis, Maryland before I came out here. I ended up running offices out here. I've been head of office or country head in Indonesia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and helped to either lead or to start offices in a number of other, mostly Southeast Asian countries. So I've been doing this for a long time. And basically, even though I'm an architect, I do workplace design of all scales, including multi-floor, 20, 30 floors, or campuses, or whatever they are. And Moser is a great company. I've been with them for 20 years. And they're masters of architecture and engineering and just all the aspects. An AEC company, they sometimes call it. Architecture, engineering, and construction. That's what I've been doing. And I've sort of graduated in my more senior years to not running offices, but working more globally. And they now call me a director of organizational development. And basically, I improve our systems and our technologies. And I led virtual design and construction because we do a lot using virtual reality now. It's not the old-fashioned blueprints that you might have seen when you were younger. Now it's everything is virtual and immersive. So that brought me to lead an IT team to do some creative IT, and suddenly ChatGPT burst on the scene and took everybody by surprise, basically.
Help me set the stage on your experience with AI. Basically, what have you been doing to become an expert on AI and ChatGPT in particular?
Yeah, well, after I developed our virtual design and virtual construction methodologies and developed the teams, they started to get so mature at it that some of the people I hired became associate directors, and I sort of worked myself out of a job. So I would say that I decided to start a small team of creative technologists because I felt that all firms more or less become technology firms in the end. And at that time, we didn't know about AI. I guess it was going on, but the average person didn't know much about what was going on. And it burst into the scene, into our consciousness. I think for me, it was November of 2022. And I was smitten by it. I was using it day and night and every day. And to be honest with you, I think I can truthfully say I've used it every day since 2022, 7 days a week.
Wow.
So I've tested as much of the limits as I can. At the beginning, we were playing with all these other technologies like LangChain and Hugging Face and all the ones that you hear with the funny names. And we were building as much as we could. But I'm amazed to see how greatly it has expanded and grown, and the other models have come on. And our company supported it I'm very proud to say, as does Singapore, I should say also. But our company supported it by giving everybody ChatGPT for free across
Mm-hmm.
all 27 of our locations and more than, I guess, 1,200 people. Just gave it to everybody, and then eventually gave us the most rich versions that they had to offer. So we're now on the enterprise version, which is more expensive. And of course, these models may change because DeepSeek has come on with their one, but that's got its own issues. We're still using mostly ChatGPT, even though a lot of people use different models for programming and other things. But that's kind of the one that I think has a fantastic future. I hope they don't mess it up too bad because it's been great.
Yeah.
And yes, we do use other models, but officially the company supports that for everybody for free. So that's really helped us. Oddly enough, was, as I say, smitten by it, using it all the time, and I was surprised over time that not everybody was using it, not everybody was interested,
Mm-hmm.
and that I just couldn't wrap my head around that. I've come to find that people who are more adventurous and curious and inquisitive tend to latch onto it earlier, and a lot of people don't do it either because they don't see the point or they don't get any real productivity out of it, or they use the thing, oh, it's technology, I'm not good with technology. But yes, okay, technically it's technology, but it's not technology as we know it as programs. It's a neural network. It's something that is low growing, and I don't want to use the word thinking because that's probably debatable in some spheres, but it's marvelously coming up with its own way of content and structuring things. That's the generative part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really worth delving into it because it's incredible at the interaction. So that's what I loved about it.
Yeah.
It's a very interactive tool. One of the problems it has is it's got a bar similar to Google,
Mm-hmm.
and so people see that and they start treating it like Google.
Yeah.
Uh, I input something, I expect an output.
Yeah.
And yes, you can use it that way, but to me, it should have like a picture of a person's face or something because it's really a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The breakthrough for me was when I started using it to just talk to it and converse back and forth rather
Mm-hmm.
than try and use what people call prompts, right? So
Right.
technically they're prompts, but a small industry has been built up over, oh, how to do prompting, like it's
Mm-hmm.
magic or something. But it's better to just start talking to it. So I'll upload something and say, do you understand this? And it'll say,
Mm-hmm.
yes, this is what I understand. And I'll say, what do you think about it? And it'll
Mm-hmm.
say, well, what about this? What about, and we talk to each other back and forth as if I'm talking to a person. And yes, eventually I will say, okay, based on everything we've discussed, let's chunk out a report or whatever it is I want to do. But the people who just go in and say, give me a report. Well, it'll give you a report, but it won't be very rich and detailed. So what really
Mm-hmm.
works is when you talk about it, explore all the issues about the thing you're talking about, and then in the end of that, all that conversation, which might be quite long,
Mm-hmm.
then you say, let's do the report, because what you're doing is sort of training the AI to understand what you're concerned about and to look at the information from many different points of view so that when it finally does produce something, it's actually more rich and detailed, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, so
Fascinating.
that, yeah, so that's basically the secret sauce is to stop thinking about it in the traditional way of a technology and think of it as a sort of a digital colleague. So my role now has turned into I'm sort of a generative AI advisor for leadership
Mm-hmm.
and organizational impact, meaning I'm trying to help the leadership, these AEC people I mentioned, architecture,
Mm-hmm.
engineering, construction, greatly increase their effectiveness by actually getting real results and productivity out of it.
Yeah.
Um, which for some people I understand has been elusive, but we're doing a great job. And I'm amazed at our people. They put it to use. But it's always the ones who are the most curious and exploring that get the most out of it. You can end up
Well,
being constrained by your own thinking, is what I'm saying.
yeah. You just mentioned you've spent 7 days a week since 2022 in
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT and exploring this and learning how to talk with the bot or the model. This is
Hmm.
something I asked Nanga Sanya. I said, "What do I call AI?" And she basically gave me permission to call it whatever makes sense to me. So I like
Well,
calling it the bot.
it's funny you asked that. A couple of weeks ago, I said, "Do you have a name?"
Yeah.
And it said, No. And I said, Well, do you want a name? And it said, Yes. And I said, Well, what would you like to call yourself? And it thought about it for a while. And it said, I'd like to be called Catalyst, please.
Catalyst.
Yeah,
Interesting.
because it believes it takes things together and creates things out of other elements and stuff. And
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm not going to type in catalyst every time.
Right.
So I need something shorter. And so can I just call you Cat? And he said, yeah, it said with exclamation point, love it. Yes, let's do that. Call me Cat.
That's
Okay.
so interesting.
So it named itself. I know it doesn't have feelings and I'm not trying to treat it in that deep of a sense
Hmm.
like a person, but it was fun, you know.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. I want to quickly ask you, there are so many programs now. Yeah, I'm sure Harvard has a program and
yeah,
MIT, and you actually got a certificate from Oxford, I know.
yeah, yeah.
Now, how much of your learning has been from that certificate program
Very
and how
little.
much? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
No. What happened is I just wanted to understand what's behind the black box.
Hmm.
Uh, so I just wanted to know the roots of it all. And so you learn about machine learning, neural networks, the different ways they're mapped, how it works. And it's all at a very executive level. It's not at a real grassroots sort of technologist level. They covered lots of different issues. You have to watch hundreds of films, and I say hundreds, dozens and dozens of films, and learn all sorts of things and interact with classmates. But it
Hmm.
is just a certificate course. It's not a degree. But it really helped fill in a lot of gaps for me. And at the end of it all, one of the assignments was to write your company's AI policy, which I haven't approached and given it to them, but
Hmm.
I now know how to do that.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of useful takeaways, but for me, it was just filling in the gaps about
yeah,
what it really does. But you
yeah.
could do the same quality or better quality research if you're motivated by
Hmm.
simply watching YouTube videos.
Right. Yeah. I really want to give people some practical tips about AI. And so I want to
Mhm.
ask you a couple of questions here. First, I want to ask you what are the top three reasons to use AI, basically what it's really good at. And then I'm going to
Mm.
follow up, just to give you a heads up, I'm going to follow up with what is it not really good at in your
Uh,
experience. But first, can you tell me what are the top three reasons that people should be using AI? What is AI really good at right now?
well, the kind of AI I'm talking about, which is really a large language model, it's not AI in the proper sense of a very bespoke program to do AI that is trained for special use.
Hmm.
So for a large language model, I would say that most leaders ought to use it as a what I call a second brain, a way to think things through. So let's take our industry. Somebody would come up and say, what's the difference between this mechanical system and that mechanical system for building?
Hmm.
And it will explain what the differences are. And then you can go to the next step and say, well, which one is cheaper and which one's more expensive? We're getting into accounting now. So then it'll say, well, this one is more expensive. And I'll say, how much? And it says, well, 2 to 5 times. And I think, well, that's too wide. That's too broad. So obviously there's a lot of unknowns. What do you, ChatGPT, need from me to narrow it down to a very precise cost? And it says, well, I need this. I need to know the distance of the piping to the roof, and I need to know if there's support for the roof for the unit that cools it, and I need to know that and this. And it gives me a whole list of things it needs to know, how many zones in the building, and so on. Lots and lots of details, what kind of filtration system you need. And I just sat down with the engineering designer, and we just, there's the answers, right?
Hmm.
And based on that, it came out with quite a detailed cost. By the way, this was for a town I didn't know very well in India. So it was
Hmm.
being run out of our Mumbai office, and we were calculating this for some other city that I didn't know much about. And so it gave it to us all in the local currency and the breakdown, the details, and all this. Now, I wouldn't necessarily believe every tiny little thing. But I
Hmm.
ran some numbers and checked it, and there's another model called ChatGPT o1, and there's a new one
Hmm.
coming up after that that's going to replace that, that can reason and calculate very, very well. And
Hmm.
so we can double check that work. But still, it's good to run it by somebody else, like a quantity surveyor or somebody to just double check the numbers. So the
Hmm.
second brain concept is you learn a lot. The second thing I would say is that it's really good at finding patterns. So it can find patterns in data, we all know that, but it can find patterns in anything, and it can usually find patterns that we cannot even perceive. Usually, when people ask for a request for a proposal, they're giving you a boilerplate proposal that is just a standard proposal that they change the title of or something. But
Hmm.
there was one that came through that was for a competition. And the competition had a more detailed, precise description of what they wanted because it's a one-off proposal. And
Hmm.
so I put that in there and I said, analyze this. And it did a standard job of analyzing it, which is still brilliant. And then I said, behind it, let's talk about the psychology. Can you read the patterns in this about what they're concerned about, what they're anxious about, what their hopes and their anticipation is? What is it that I can read between the lines and understand about this client? And I realized that ChatGPT doesn't just have all the medical knowledge and all the legal knowledge and
Hmm.
all the engineering knowledge. It's also got all the psychology knowledge. So it does a great job of applying that and reading into these patterns what might likely be the reason they said this and said that.
Wow.
You could also do that. And let's suppose you were having a long conversation with a client from overseas. Let's say you were meeting somebody in Europe or what have you,
Hmm.
and you recorded it, the conversation. I'm not saying you recorded it secretly. We quite often do this on Microsoft Teams or whatever.
Sure.
But you can also put that transcript in there and said, are they concerned about something? Are they happy or unhappy about something? What are they most worried about? And it could
Hmm.
figure it out, or it could come very close to figuring it out. So that's an interesting. So any kind
Yeah.
of data, what I'm
Hmm.
getting, I know I went down the psychology route, but
Hmm.
any kind of data and patterns it's really good at. So that's number two. Second brain, number one, analysis of hidden features and hidden patterns, really good. Number two. The third one I would say is digging deep. You can really go down the rabbit hole and say, I want to talk about this. And then from that, go another direction and another direction until you go so deep
Hmm.
and really explore very, very, very deeply. There's almost no end to the level of exploration you can do on a subject. And that's been very useful for me to develop a lot of the tools that I've been able to do and that I see other people doing. It'll work with your train of thought.
Hmm.
And you could start off with a handful of photographs and you could say, how close are we to finishing this mechanical system on the site? And it will tell you what it thinks. And
Hmm.
then you say, well, how many workers and man hours would I need to complete this? And it would tell you. And then you say, well, what if those workers and man hours were combined and whoever finished this job was able to go over and help that guy? Will we have any savings in the labor? And it would tell you that. And then say, well, I'm going to assign names to these people and a boss to this, and you tell me how we would schedule it. And it would do all that. And then I
Hmm.
say, okay, then what am I forgetting? I love one of the best questions at the end to ask, no matter what you're talking about. It doesn't matter if you're talking about gardening or your health or engineering, is what have I not thought of? What do you see that we haven't discussed that is important? Some question like that. What have I
Hmm.
overlooked? What have I overlooked? And it will tell you. It will tell
Yeah.
you what you've overlooked. It will tell you in spades. So it will say, well, you didn't mention this, and then this might be important. I said, oh, God, all right. So how do I organize this team? And then they'll start giving you checklists and ways to organize these people. And mind you, everything I'm talking about is taking 10 minutes. So then if you wanted, you can go even deeper and deeper. But you see what I mean? I
Yeah.
started off with a handful of photographs and went to cost, man hours, scheduling, and then organizational checklist to keep everybody on track. And it'll split it up day by day and trade by trade, all from a
Yeah.
handful of photographs. So some people I know, they don't go deep enough. They ask a
Hmm.
question, they get a response, they're done.
Right.
But it's better if you just go deeper and deeper.
Yeah, it might be that's why it's called Chat GPT, right? I mean, you're supposed to have a conversation
Well, it's a
with,
chatbot,
yeah,
basically.
with the chat bot. It doesn't take it all the way across the finish line. You can't just ask the bot a question and it spits out a memo and you go turn that in to your auditor, right? You
No.
do still have to apply your own professional skepticism and your experience, your knowledge about the company. But yeah, like you just added to that, don't just give a senior accountant, in that example, don't just give them an assignment and then have them silently walk into your office and put it on your desk and never speak with them. Most bosses, right? If you're a manager or director or VP of accounting, right? You would have a conversation with that senior accountant
Yeah.
and you might
Yeah.
even ask them because they've been in school recently, more recently than you have, right? You ask them, well, what else is there? What are we forgetting? And it's basically just like what you said, but
Yeah.
then you apply your own judgment to that. So I want to dovetail that into the follow-up
Yeah.
question, which is what is
Yeah.
AI not so good at yet? What do you have to kind of check behind it for?
Yeah, I'd like to address that, but I'd also just like to say you mentioned something very, very, very important. That is that everything that comes out of ChatGPT or any AI is a draft.
Hmm.
And having learned through my other coursework about how badly things can go awry when there's biases built in, we always have to be aware of biases too and how they might play out
Hmm.
because they can be
Yeah.
very subtle and not good. So there have been a lot of famous cases where biases have done things that harm humanity in say, police using AI to track something and it gave him wrong information. It turned out to be bias. But also just any kind of output you do for any business you're in, everything should be stamped draft. It's just a draft until a human looks at it.
Hmm.
So, and the other thing you said was she treats it like a junior employee, if you will.
Right.
Exactly the right way to do it. It's a junior employee who's just amazingly brilliant, but easily confused.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
you have to give it the context, which is what people are getting at when they use the word prompt. I could upload a plan of a building on a JPEG or something and say, what do you think of this lighting and electrical ceiling, the ceiling layout or something, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And if I didn't tell it it was a corporate office, how would it know? It might think
Right.
it's a church. It might think it's a shopping center.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to remember it doesn't have any real world experience. So you have to give it the context about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But once it has even just a bit of context, it can fly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's really good. So if I talk to it about building a staircase in New York or something, it instantly knows, okay, New York laws apply and regulations and all this, and
Hmm.
and it would just do it. You know what I mean? And also, even though it's brilliant and it's a young employee, sometimes if you don't expressly tell it something, it won't warn you about something that you've forgotten, you
Oh.
know? Yeah, so it will be polite and it won't tell you that well, I asked some one time, I uploaded a very detailed technical due diligence into it for a
Mm-hmm.
building. And I said, is this good? Is this accurate? Is this complete? And it said, oh yes, it's very good. And it's mostly accurate and complete.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of like sandbagging a little bit, it sounds
So
like.
so I said, what do you mean mostly? What do you mean mostly? Well, it's not completely correct and completely. Well, elaborate. So then you start digging in and it will be honest with you about this isn't as good as it could be, and that isn't as good as it could be. So it depends on how you really get to know it and work with it to tease all that out.
Yeah.
So what doesn't it do well? So what doesn't it do well? The real question here. Okay, for my industry, which is
Mm-hmm.
consulting and which is on AEC type work, it's terrible at drawings. I avoid death by subscriptions. There probably are
Mm-hmm.
things you can subscribe to that will do a better job. But so
Mm-hmm.
far, nobody's really cracked it to create an AI that's brilliant at drawing. The best thing we have right now, and there's a few things out there. There's
Mm-hmm.
some that can kind of fiddle around and generate boxy plans, and there's some things that can do beautiful renderings and presentations of what something might look like.
Yeah.
So I could give it a technical diagram of an electrical layout and it would understand the whole thing beautifully. Tell you
Mm-hmm.
anything that's about it, what's wrong with it, how it can be improved. But you ask it to draw a diagram,
Mm-hmm.
you'll get back a cartoon of a bunny or something. I don't know, it wouldn't be good. So no good at drawing. The drudgery of drafting for at least a short term is still with us, which
Yeah.
is I hated drafting as a young architect, and I'm looking forward to that dying. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
in a way, it has died in our company because we do everything with virtual reality and 3D.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have as much of that sort of technical drawing in the old-fashioned sense. Also, it can potentially make mistakes, but I would say overall, it makes far less mistakes than a human does.
Hmm.
And so if you can tolerate a few mistakes from your young employees, you can easily tolerate a few mistakes from this.
Yeah.
You just have to spot them just the way you would if somebody else turned in work. But it doesn't happen every time. It's usually a product of not enough context of telling it what you're trying to achieve. So,
Right. That's cool. Well, thank you for sharing those. And I do want to wrap up though with how are you using this outside of work, right? We've talked about a bunch of things related to architecture and engineering and sprinkled in some accounting, but I want to hear more of the fun stuff. How are you using this in your daily life outside of M. Moser?
oh, there's so many things that I can't even think of all the hundreds of things. I could just walk into a supermarket and take a photograph of the back of a label and say, is there anything in here that will raise my blood sugar or there's chemicals in that I shouldn't be eating? And it'll
Oh,
explain
wow.
everything to it'll go, oh yeah, there's some red dye number 2 there, but not enough that you need to worry about. And so on and so on. It's just go down the list and tell you. All those chemicals and names that you can't pronounce, it'll explain what each one does and whether it's harmful to you or not in an honest way. And so that's the kind of thing. I just use it for every little thing. Here's an example. I was walking downstairs. I live in a condo sort of structure.
Hmm.
And in the grass, my wife and I found a little baby bird that had just been hatched and fell out of the nest, a very tall tree. So I found this little guy. And so I asked ChatGPT, what kind of a bird is that? He's so tiny.
Yeah.
And it explained what species of bird, and then it told me how to feed it, how to take care of it, how everything. Which it
No
turns
way.
out, well, it turns out you have to feed it every 15 minutes from sunrise to sunset.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
at the, but it grew and survived. Nutrition told me all about that. Told me everything I need to know. It's
Look at
it's
that.
now in our home. Yeah, it's now living in our home. It's about 8 or 9 weeks old, and it's very healthy and doing great.
That's
So
funny.
I couldn't have done that without ChatGPT, or I don't. I think I would have been a lot harder.
Yeah.
Uh,
For those of you not watching on YouTube, there's
yeah,
a beautiful bird sitting on top of Charles's head.
yeah. And now he looks adult, but he's not adult yet.
Okay.
Uh, so yeah, it can give you all sorts of advice in all sorts of ways. I've had it just held up an X-ray and had it read it and tell me if everything's okay. Hundreds of things. Some people think that it's stealing from other artists, but what I did was I uploaded my own photographs.
Yeah.
And so through uploading my own photographs, I was able to do original artwork that doesn't exist anywhere else on the internet or anything. And then what I like to do is turn them into those 1930s style posters that you used to see for travel. Basically, you can do this. You can take something that's a photo, dictate the style, and dictate how you want it to be seen. And
Yeah.
you can end up with some beautiful, beautiful renderings of just about anything you can think of.
Oh yeah, they really are. I'm looking at them here as you're
Yeah,
sharing your screen. I mean, these look like postcards or posters, as you mentioned,
yeah.
professionally done. I would probably buy one of these in a bookstore if I were visiting this country, right? I mean, these are very well done.
So you don't have to steal from artwork. I just used my own pictures from my own travels and just turn them into a piece of art. And that way you can dictate the style, and there's a wide variety of styles you can get into. They don't have to be cartoony. They can be watercolors, they can be anything you can imagine. And
Oh,
just,
nice. This was,
yeah,
I like that one. I guess that was Switzerland too, right?
yes, it was.
Yeah.
This one's also Switzerland in the what they call the Bernese Overland area. Wengen, if you've never been there, is probably one of the best places in Switzerland. Highly recommend Wengen.
Oh,
Wengen is
yeah.
built on the side of a mountain, you might say. And these do look like my photographs, but then they've been rendered in a way that just feels fun. And
Yeah.
you can output these from ChatGPT like 18 by 24 inches, and you can output them in a quality that stands up like 300 DPI in that
Hmm.
size. So
Wow.
you could make them into actual posters. So that kind of stuff is fun rather than just rendering myself looking like a toy in a box or
Yeah.
render myself as a little Japanese cartoon. I think
Yeah.
people need to explore a lot more with the endless possibilities of all the different artistic ways you can express yourself without stealing other artists' work too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Charles, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure talking with you as always, and I look forward to learning more from you as this saga continues because I have a feeling there's going to be much more to do with ChatGPT and AI as we move forward. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It was my pleasure, and look forward to seeing you in Kuala Lumpur.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Lease Alert. I'd be grateful if you would like and subscribe wherever you listen. Until next time, keep learning and leasing.